So thank you for Lena coming to the privacy talk. It's a very honor to have a talk with you from Washington, DC. This time we will be talking about the privacy, especially like this industry is also the futures of mobile applications, these topics. So let's move on. Lena, please introduce yourself and your backgrounds about your activities.
Wonderful. Well, thank you so much, Kohei-san, for inviting me. It's an honor. I'm excited to be here. So my name is Lena Ghamrawi, and I live in Washington, D.C. I'm a lawyer by training, but my background has primarily been in data protection consulting. So for a few years, I was helping commercial clients become compliant with GDPR and CCPA. And then I also spent a little bit of time in the federal government side, helping federal agencies with their privacy programs as well. So I did that for a few years. And recently I joined a new nonprofit called the International Digital Accountability Council, or IDAC for short. IDAC was launched in April of this year, so we are very new. And we are essentially a nonprofit international watchdog. And our goal is to improve the digital space by holding companies, developers, and platforms accountable for their privacy practices. We think that there's been a gap in this area, and there hasn't been enough independent players holding these key groups accountable. So our team, just to break it down really quickly, we're composed of a few lawyers like myself, and then we also work closely with technologists to work on investigations together. Mm-hmm. And our investigations really consist of three key stages. So at first, we have to assess whether or not there's misconduct happening. Mm-hmm. So usually we get referrals from outside people, or even just ourselves. We say, hey, we're interested in looking at, for example, COVID-19 apps. Let's see if there's anything going on there. So we base our initial assessment on a few factors. We look at how many impacted users there potentially could be, the type of information that we think is being collected or shared, as well as the severity and egregiousness of the harm. From there, if we think, okay, something bad is happening, we then move on to the investigation stage where our policy lawyers like myself work with the technologists to determine if the conduct is violating some kind of platform terms of services or developer policies. And our technologists work with a set of very sophisticated tech tools, and they essentially conduct a set of static and dynamic tests. So they're able to take the mobile phone, for example, and download the app, pretend that they're a user of the app, but then also look underneath the hood. And so they're able to see what kind of information the app is collecting, which third parties are getting that information, whether the transmissions are encrypted or not. So it's really interesting and cool stuff. And from there, if we find out that there is possibly misconduct, we then refer the case either to the developer. So in some cases, we've actually gone to the companies and we said, hey, we're noticing this happening on your app. Can you explain further? Did we get this information right? And if we are right, can you change your behavior because it's violating a law or a term of service or a developer policy? The nice thing is, so far, even though we've only been in existence for a few months, we have had multiple instances where we've tapped a developer on the shoulder and they've come back and said, you know what, you're right. We didn't even know we were doing this thing. Thanks for telling us, we'll fix it, which is great. In some cases, more rare, the developers don't really want to cooperate with us because nobody likes to be policed. So we then refer the case to the platform. So we'll go to Apple or Google or Twitter and say, hey, this is happening in your backyard. You should enforce against this kind of practice. And then in the worst cases, and this is very rare, we then refer the case to law enforcement. So we'll go to a state AG or the FTC and say, hey, look into this case. We think they're violating XYZ laws. At the same time, we'll also go public and take it with the media to inform the public of what's happening. Just for a quick concrete example, we actually released a COVID-19 app report about 6 weeks ago now, where we looked at a survey of apps globally. We looked at 108 COVID-19 mobile apps across 41 countries. And we basically looked at what kinds of SDKs the apps used, whether the transmissions were encrypted or not, the types of permissions the apps requested, and what kind of information was being shared with third parties. The good news is that most of these apps, the app developers took great care to protect, such sensitive COVID-19 information. So like health information or location data. We did, however, find a few areas for improvement. And so we wrote the report, we highlighted the areas of improvement, and I'm happy to say that actually after the report was released, a few of the companies we pointed to changed their practices for the better. So we hope to continue this kind of work in other areas. So we are looking, we're interested in apps that are collecting location information. We're interested in children's apps and other kinds of health apps as well.
Yeah, this sounds very good. I think the so many apps that are coming out through the App Store that people can easy to download it, but especially like the kids or child who needs the help to understand it, what's the point of your data is being collected, and intentionally to the third parties or any providers, the data controllers. I think this is a very big problem. So the thing is, I want to look into your role in the International Digital Accountability Council. So you're working on the Chief of Staff, which is I think it's a very key part of the organizations, how it works in these teams. What is the role about it?
Yeah, great question. So I serve two roles actually. So I am the Chief of Staff at IDAC, but I'm also the Policy Counsel. We are, like I said, a brand new organization. We're very small. So I wear many hats, but essentially as Chief of Staff, I make sure that investigations are moving forward, that we are doing the proper outreach with developers, platforms, and other stakeholders, and essentially just make sure that our objectives and goals are being met. So it's been a lot of work so far, but it's been a great experience.
I see, yeah. I'm working on the small team at this moment right now. It's very important to organize the team members to make the elections where we make missions, we make an active practice. So that's very important that you're working on this space. So besides, the next question is you working on the women in security and privacy. I think it's supposed to be like a very grassroots approach to encourage especially the females to make sense to all the processes, the cybersecurity, the privacy space. So please give introductions of what this activity is working on, especially you working on the DC chapters. So what do you do in there?
Yeah, happy to talk about it. I love WISP. So WISP is, like you said, Women in Security and Privacy. We are a nonprofit organization. We were launched in 2014 out in San Francisco, California. But over the past few years, we've now extended our branches both within the US and also we're trying to do a more international reach. So we have offices now in New York, Dublin. I think we're starting one in Seattle. And then as of last year, I helped start the Washington, DC chapter. And essentially we have 4 key pillars that we focus on. The first is education. So we want to help women achieve the level of education and skills that are required for them to excel in the security and privacy fields. Next, a big component of our work is revolved around mentorship and networking. So basically fostering a community and a safe space for women to come, share knowledge, experience, and also just mentor each other. The third pillar is advancement. So essentially we want to support career advancement and professional development for women. One interesting thing is that our group has an array of women across different timelines in their careers. So we have people that are still in school and trying to figure out what to do. And then we have women who are in the C-suite level that have basically reached the end of their career.
Mm-hmm.
So it's been interesting to have a mix of these women. I think one reason for that is our membership is free and anybody is encouraged to join. So there's really no barrier to enter. And then lastly, the last pillar is leadership. So we want to increase thought leadership and visibility. We like to amplify the voices of those in our community. So for example, if somebody writes an article, we want to then share it with everybody else. We promote it on social media. We want to provide speaking opportunities for people that otherwise may not have those opportunities. Mm-hmm. So overall, WISP is a wonderful organization. If anybody listening to this wants to join, please feel free to reach out to me. Mm-hmm. Given that with COVID-19, everything's mm-hmm. virtual anyways, I don't think where you live is going mm-hmm. to be a detriment. And in terms of the DC program, so every chapter has its own kind of unique flavor. Mm-hmm. So for example, in San Francisco, it's very much focused on tech and security. In DC, our group is more focused on policy and government relations, mm-hmm. just given that we are so close to the Capitol. But we've also been able to create our own programs within DC. So mm-hmm. one program I'm really proud of is our mentorship program. We just launched this 6 months ago, and we've already been able to pair 15 or so different groups together. Mm-hmm. So that's been exciting. We've also been able to offer scholarships and discounts to local privacy and security conferences, mm-hmm. which has been nice because usually those are really expensive. And a lot of times early career professionals and students can't afford it. We're also able to provide industry certification training materials. Mm-hmm. So for example, a lot of people are trying to take the IAPP privacy certification, but they don't have the resources or the study materials to get there. So mm-hmm. we have free resources for people that are interested. And then lastly, we also just host educational, interesting events. Again, we've also partnered with the IAPP mm-hmm. quite a lot in the past. So they've been great partners.
Yeah, that sounds very good. I haven't imagined that in the US, in the same situation, that there are big gaps in between the genders. Especially the Japanese gender gap is also the very hot topics to overcome. The making the great business model. So I'm wondering what is the bad point if you have any gender gap, the less diversities in the community of the cybersecurity is the data privacy from a sense?
Yeah, that's a great question. So I think, well, first of all, between privacy and cybersecurity, there's also a difference. There's more gender equality and parity within the privacy community. The gap is much more glaring in the cybersecurity field. I think a huge thing is having mentorship, but also having formal sponsorships. So people that will vouch for you, people that will make sure you get those jobs is really important. And I think a lot of women lack that kind of formal sponsorship person in their life. So I think addressing that is really important. I also think finding ways to amplify the women are important. And at least in the privacy sector, I've noticed a lot of men saying, you know what, I'm not going to speak on this panel if there's not another woman, or I'm going to give up my opportunity to speak on the panel and give it to a woman that wasn't contacted. Mm-hmm. So I think sharing the mic, the term, is one way to address that.
I see. Yeah, that's very great approach. We have many problems in the minorities, especially like a lot of the conference, like a business talks, the most of the males, and just the talking and the story, the histories. Of course, it was good, but the futures we change the dynamic, especially like the data model, the societies. It's not just the one single. The philosophy exactly. Just for the multiple inclusion. So that's the approach is a very significant to widespread the more healthy and safety data societies. Yeah, I totally agree that you were doing that. So let's move on to the next topics, which is the more kind of the practice. So we work on the lawyers. Also, you are part of the policies. I think there's some announcement is happens, especially like Apple, the Googles, these big companies are working on the data privacy at this moment. So the thing is, accountability is the very ambiguous word, but I think it's very important for all the countries. What do you think about the accountabilities, the importance, since the Apple is announced in the WWDC this year's, they're focusing on the many topics related to the privacy issues. So what will be the dynamic impact to the app developers or product makers in general?
Yeah, that's a great question. So I think following Apple's announcement at the Worldwide Developer Conference 3 weeks ago or so, I do think it is going to significantly impact product development. I think the biggest thing is that their new iOS 14 rules are really going to push developers to practice and follow privacy by design principles. So for example, I know Apple now is requiring simpler privacy notices to increase transparency, similar to what we call like a nutrition label. It's basically you look at an app and within a few moments you can figure out exactly what the app collects about you, who they share it with. And also what's really interesting is that Apple now is requiring developers to also include information about third-party codes that they embed in their app. And we can talk about SDKs in a moment, but that is pretty significant because before that, users had no idea what third-party code was in a mobile app. So Apple now is requiring that. I think that's a great step in the right direction. Apple's also now requiring changes in terms of obtaining consent for tracking controls. Same thing with location requests. And then a really interesting new requirement is previously apps that needed to access, let's say, a picture on your camera roll, they had to access the whole camera library and photo library to get that one picture, which was a bit intrusive. But now users have the ability to actually just select exactly what photos they want and share it with the app without having to share their whole roll. Just something that I thought was exciting. But yes, I think overall, these iOS 14 changes are going to increase accountability. I think it's really important given how complex and how opaque the ecosystem has been. Mm-hmm. So again, I just think that by Apple's announcement, developers now have to incorporate privacy by design. They have to think about privacy at the outset of their product development as opposed to an afterthought. And I hope that by Apple announcing this, that Google and other major platforms will also take step and follow.
Mm-hmm. Thank you. To comply with these the new system, so what kind of the impact for the startups or any new products makers who organize the coordination of the architectures? So do you think any big impact for them?
Yeah, I mean, I think now, like I said, just even startups have to think about privacy. Mm-hmm. And in the past, it seems like startups didn't really value privacy or understand, why they had to spend so much time and resources doing privacy when they look at other companies that forgoed it and became profitable. But now it's important for them to incorporate privacy principles. I just don't think it's an option anymore. Users have become very aware of mm-hmm. privacy. They're demanding their rights. And also there's been just deep distrust within the digital space. And so one way for startups to restore that trust is to really take users' privacy seriously.
I see. Yeah, thank you for the ideas. So you said about the software development case as well, which is a kind of the very effective tools that the app developer can easy to integrate the processes. However, at this moment, the SDK is one of the factors to collected your data unintentionally through the third party, such as in the Zoom program in the March, they use in a Facebook SDK, but actually the user data is being collected to them. So mm-hmm. what do you think the most concerned with the third party SDK in general?
Yeah, this is a great question, and this is actually a topic that our organization IDAC has done quite a bit of work on. Just to go back for the viewers 1 second, SDKs are essentially pieces of code that provide a certain functionality within the app. So, for example, if an app developer is like, "Hey, I'm building this app and I want to have a social media login," or "I want the app to push notifications to users," they'll take a code from somewhere else and kind of embed it in the app and move on. And it's easy to understand why developers do this because it's convenient, it's fast, they don't have to build the whole code from scratch. So it's a very common practice. But in the past, developers would just add in a bunch of third-party SDK codes in their app, not think about it, and move on. Now, we're learning that a lot of these SDKs are really aggressive in the amount of information that they're trying to collect and share. So the concerns here really are the fact that, one, users have no insight into what third-party SDKs are in an application. So let's say I download an app, let's say Venmo. I have no idea what third-party SDKs are in Venmo, and there's no way for me to find out. It's usually not posted in a privacy policy. It's not posted anywhere. So that's one thing. The second thing that's really concerning is, besides their inherently aggressive data collection practices, a lot of SDKs have also been acting in irresponsible ways. So one example that our team has come across now multiple times, and this is mostly in the Android context, is that third-party SDKs are collecting lists of all the apps you have installed on your phone. So they'll be taking constant screenshots of all the apps that you're installing and also uninstalling, and taking all that information about you, and they can then infer a tremendous amount of information about the users. So for example, if, let's say, an SDK took a snapshot of someone's, all the apps someone has, and let's say that person has like the Bible app, maybe like a fertility tracker app, maybe like a CNN app, you can then infer a lot about that person. You can know what their religious beliefs are, what their political leanings are, any financial situation they're in. And by having all that information, these third-party SDKs can take that, create and generate user unique profiles that are then used for tracking and advertising. So it's pretty invasive and creepy. And again, there's just no way for users to know that it's happening, because it happens very quietly in the background. And there's no way for users to stop it. And hypothetically, let's say a user does find out that the Venmo app that they downloaded has a bad SDK, and this is all hypothetical. The only way to stop it is to just uninstall the app, which is not fair. It's not fair that the users then have the responsibility of making sure this doesn't happen. The responsibility should really fall on these SDKs and the app developers to make sure they don't do this kind of behavior. I think my advice to any app developers out there is, carefully review what SDKs you're putting into your app. Make sure they're only collecting what they have to collect. Otherwise, don't use them.
I see. From the user point, we have just the touch point through the privacy policies, so what the company is providing, the details, the consent of data. So is there any alternative to know about the like a specific data processing from the data controllers?
Yeah, so like you said, right now the users only can rely on a privacy policy. And from what we've seen, a lot of privacy policies don't disclose what third-party SDKs they have embedded. But like I previously mentioned, Apple, with the new iOS 14 requirements, is now going to actually ask developers to include information about what third-party code they use, which is exciting. Yeah. It's a step in the right direction. It doesn't necessarily mean that users could do anything about it, but at least now they know.
I see. Yeah, sounds amazing. So in this sense, the Apple and Google is working on the COVID-19 applications architectures as well, which is very helpful for the local authority is just adopting the truth. The Japanese government is also the choosing their system. Is there any concerns these COVID-19 apps in the SDKs, that they collecting the data without any consent from the users in any place?
Yeah, and that's a great question. So IDAC did do the COVID-19 app study recently, and we did find that out of the 108 mobile apps, only I think 8 or 9 were inserting SDKs that we thought were problematic. So because COVID-19 apps collect very sensitive information about users, we do think that the level of care is heightened there. So we don't, in our belief, we don't think that these developers should be embedding advertising SDKs, for example. And we saw a few apps that had advertising SDKs in them. And we actually worked with the app developers to inform them that this is probably not the best practice, because typically if you have an advertising SDK in your app, it means that the app is serving ads and then making money off of users' data. And COVID-19 is not a place to be monetizing user-sensitive information. So that was the extent of what we saw. Otherwise, it looks like most COVID-19 developers are taking great care to only use SDKs that they actually need to help make the app function. So that was the good news.
I see. From the user side, what they need to pay attention when they download it, when they use it, just for the privacy policy, or just to like the requirements for the government or any other data controllers to make a transparency, the illustrations in advance, or any way fix that?
Yeah, I think I think with COVID-19 apps in particular, user trust is so important. So I do think that these companies and the governments deploying these apps should definitely be very transparent about their practices. In our survey of the 108 apps, we saw that most of them were, but some of them were not very transparent. In terms of what the users could do, I think it's mostly, look at the privacy policy. But I think that's really the extent of it. So if users don't feel confident in these apps, they're not going to use them, and it's going to make the COVID-19 tech efforts not as effective and not as widely adopted, which I think is a shame, because I do think that these apps could really help.
I see. Yeah, that's great point. So finally, please give us some message to the Asian and the other Japanese companies, the corporations working on the mobile apps, because they use the Facebook, the Google SDKs as well. There are many concerns it happens in the future. So please give a message to them.
Yeah, and I think this is a message probably for all app developers, not ones just in Asian countries. But I do think carefully reviewing what third-party code you're using is really important, and understanding how it works. So don't take shortcuts. Take the time to understand how these third-party SDKs and other codes integrate into your app and what information it's collecting. The next is just to be very transparent about your practices and your privacy policy. Make it simple and clear for users to understand. The next one is around permissions. So I think permissions are interesting space. I do think that app developers should only make the app request permissions that are absolutely needed for the app to function. So a lot of times the app developers request all types of permissions, which then ends up resulting in the app collecting more information than is needed. And again, without really users being aware. So be very careful and only tailor your request for permissions for things that the app needs. And then lastly, kind of going along with the permissions, really only collect the information that's needed. In the past, a lot of developers would just collect as much information as they could because that was the model everybody was going off of. Now, I think it's switching and it's more gearing towards data minimization. Really only collect what you need so that you can provide your services to users. So I think those are the main points there, both to Asian companies, but also just to any companies that are thinking about deploying apps.
Yeah, that's great advice. So Lena, thank you for having a talk today. It's a very great interviews. So all the listeners will be very excited to having a great time with you, the insight. So thank you for this time. So let's move on to the collaboration. I guess this privacy part is been updating so fast, but we have to catch up for the healthy data economy. So thank you for coming today.
Thank you so much for having me, Kohai. I really appreciate it.
Thank you. Bye.